doing some Twitter promotion shit. Hold on, let me just notify the rest of the people that it's on. There's probably an easier way to automate this. I should probably figure out at some point. At some point. At some point, I'll figure it out. At some point. Oh shit. I need to also figure out my room. Shit's messy. Shit's messy. So how's everyone's doing? How you doing, Trishalist? How's it going? How is it hanging? All right. I think I got everything down. Out of curiosity, was Wing Chun the one and only martial arts you've ever undergone? And if it was your first, why that one in particular? Actually, I grew up Korean, as many of you may know. And so in Korean school, there was like a taekwondo class. You did your basic, what is it? Taekwondo, right? And you had your kicks or whatever. But I wasn't ever particularly like good. I mean, this was only Korean school taekwondo. It wasn't like I went to an actual taekwondo like place. Some friends of mine actually did, but I was never really into that. And then when I was like 9 or 10, my dad made me do like kendo, like Japanese sword fighting, because he was getting really into that shit. He actually started, so if I was 9 or so, he probably started when he was around 42, which is funny because that's the age, or 41 or so, because like I started Wing Chun last year when I was 41. So I guess maybe like father, like son, we pick up a martial art that we like. He used to be really in it. I only did it for a year because there was only like the only other kids were like Jap kids. They were like Jap fobs. And so they didn't even really speak English. And of course, I didn't speak Japanese, so that was kind of like short-lived for me because I was like, "What the point? What the fuck is the point of this? I don't talk to anyone. Nobody. I don't like anyone here. I'm the only Korean in a Jap-infested place." Obviously, like it didn't matter to my dad because he wanted to just do the kendo, right? He was there for the kendo. He probably didn't care if he was making friends with any of the Japs his age. But I was like, this is fucking boring as fuck. So I ended after a year. He actually went on to become like I don't know, a black belt for his, age group or whatever. He actually went to I think he went to, fucking hell. I think he went to tournaments in like Georgia, like the senior above 55 class or whatever, like long time ago. Anyway, after that, I actually did do like a few months of jujitsu in 2021 because I heard that was like the thing to know if you're gonna do some actual self-defense stuff. And it probably is probably the most practical and definitely probably the best for your health in general because you're doing a lot of rolling around and whatever, and that's really good for your core and stuff like that. But I guess like it just didn't intrigue me, I guess. And so last year, I was considering doing martial arts again. I was like, well, why don't I try learning, you know, what seems fun and interesting to me, and that was like Wing Chun. I had just not just, but like I'd watched obviously Ip Man, like, probably 10, 15 years ago. Um, I actually never really grew up on Bruce Lee myself. I never watched Enter the Dragon. I never watched anything with Bruce Lee really, except for like clips, on YouTube or whatever. I never watched the full Bruce Lee movie on its own. But ironically enough, my Sifu was trained by Bruce Lee's like kind of best friend, the one who introduced him to Yip Man. No, I heard that Krav Maga is like not actually useful. It's kind of like bullshit nonsense that like the IDF kind of talks about as propaganda. It's really just like, and people have told me it's not really practical because like, you're not really in a lot of situations where you're having a knife or defending against a knife in real life combat, whereas you're, obviously, with Wing Chun or even jujitsu, you're grappling more. That's just like real life. Like you're gonna be in those situations much more often. And so, people have told me that it's kind of just not that great of a thing, and its so-called, usefulness is kind of propaganda, especially after. I remember after Born Identity, there was a lot of like propaganda of Krav Maga being like the ultimate kind of thing, but I heard it's kind of just like nonsense jibber jabber. And it's also kind of like, you know, um I didn't know this until I got into it, but Wing Chun is kind of like very philosophical, you know? And Kung Fu is really where all sorts of like martial arts styles do come from, like initially, right? You know, um, Even Wing Chun itself is a fairly recent kind of martial art. It's within the Kung Fu umbrella, but it's only like a few centuries old. Like I think it's developed in the 1600 out of several other styles. Like it sounds like a joke, like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, but there are like mantis fighting styles or whatever. The Kung Fu Panda stuff isn't just made up nonsense. That there is such thing as like um crane style or snake style or whatever, but that's all incorporated into Wing Chun. And the reason there is kind of like animal styles is because back in the day, that's how these kung fu masters would develop their own kind of fighting techniques. They would see how do animals fight in the wild, right? Because animals are conditioned to be in their peak physical like capabilities. They're maximizing their physical capabilities. So what do they do when they're fighting to like maximize their chances for survival? Like what are the things that they do? And so there's certain principles that like are like out of the movements of a snake or out of the movements of a crane and stuff like that. And so because it's all contained within the kung fu sort of tradition, I thought like as a person who likes to think in systems and like origins, I like to get to the OG type stuff. So that's kind of like why I went into Wing Chun, and I'm kind of happy that I did. I feel like I wish I went into Wing Chun a lot earlier, because like as a 40-something-year-old, I'm definitely practicing a lot more than people my age would be, especially my age in class or whatever. But I feel like I would have been a lot more active in practicing, in my youth. Um, and it probably would have given me a lot more opportunities in, my acting career and stuff like that. So, kind of regret not getting into it earlier, but obviously better late than never, I would say. And that's something I wish I should do more, or I should be practicing much more often. But um, yeah. Anyway, that's that. Trillion dollars, yes, 1.5 trillion dollars. That's what I'll be talking about later. Yeah, plus it's Israeli, exactly. Isn't Krav Maga all cheap shots and molestation? I don't know if raping Palestinian children is part of the actual Krav Maga canon. Wouldn't be surprised if it was, but exactly. Wing Chun's foundation is the center line. It's strangely like Kumdo Kendo. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of similarities for sure. The honorless martial art. Yeah, Krav Maga looks like some weird dance. Try target focus training. What is target focus training? Does that require a gun? Saved my life from getting killed. It's the best practical learning for self-defense. Hey Doug, which one of the many books in the back influenced you the most intellectually? Oh, you know, I still have to read this one. This whole thing is not read. This front one is red, the red part. This big back one is not red. I have to still read that. But the one next to it is mostly red, this part. And then there's a lot of other books on the side. This is the Asian section that you can't see here. That was like the Germany Nazi section that I pointed to right here. And this is the American Anglo section. But truthfully, I was first kind of like inspired mostly by, my journey kind of began by reading Malcolm X in 2020. I had not even known about Marx or Lenin for, I didn't even know about them until probably mid 2020, end of 2020, when I started to read Lenin's Imperialism. I think it was fall. It might have been the summer or fall of 2020, a few months into the pandemic, maybe like 6 months in the pandemic or so, where I finally read Lenin Imperialism. And so I would suggest, if you're coming in fresh out of nothing, like Malcolm X's biography, the reason I like it is because it kind of like, for me, it was kind of like a red pill, right? Because like I'm coming from the idea, the mentality that America, again, like I think most Americans have this mentality, right? Where it's like, yeah, maybe we did some bad shit, but we did less bad shit than other worse shit people. So, unfortunately, we're the best of a lot of bad options. So, I mean, that's what it is, right? That's all I can say as an American, right? But then I think like reading Malcolm X's book, you're just kind of like, oh shit, yeah, we were never the good guys. And it just kind of like, it's just a very raw, real look at what America was like 100 years ago. For black people, obviously, but also, I think a lot of people focused on the civil rights movement. They all focus on the South and segregation. And, obviously that's a much more or tangible form of racism. So it's easy to kind of like conceptualize, right? You can see, segregation in the South or voting rights or Jim Crow laws. And this is very tangible realities in the antebellum South, or not the antebellum, but just kind of like the Jim Crow South, right? After Reconstruction ended in 1877. So it's kind of like, it's stuff that I know about, right? It's stuff that I knew. I've studied enough American history to know about Reconstruction and Jim Crow and whatever. But it's another thing to kind of like read the realities of it. And I think the thing about Malcolm X that spoke to me the most was that, there was this kind of he talks about when he's like so it's very clear he's a very intelligent individual, right? Like if he was white, for example, he would have definitely had some sort of, at least like a lawyer or whatever career. Like he'd definitely have a professional career if he was white, right? It's like very intelligent, obviously. And so when he's in middle school, he tells about a story about like how his teacher, his white teacher kind of asks him, hey, like, what do you think you want to do when you grow up? And he remembers telling him kind of like, oh, I think I'm going to be a lawyer because like I'm interested in doing that. And then the white teacher was like, son, you need to be serious. Like that's not a thing for you or something like that. And when he heard that, his response was to be like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm going to drop out and be a hustler. Right? Because it's just kind of like as a black person, you're either told, hey, you're going to get a shitty job, like fucking, being a busboy or like a bellboy or like one of the people that presses the buttons on the elevator in New York City, those kinds of jobs back in the day. But you ain't being a lawyer, right? And that led him to pursue a life of crime, right? As a pimp, as a hustler, as that's what he did. After he didn't even go to high school because he was like, well, why bother going to high school if all I'll ever amount to is one of those options, or I could just start hustling and make some money, right? And so it's the same kind of thing, like where the reason it resonated with me is because I feel like as Asian dudes, especially, we're told that all the time, right? You can only be, ironically enough, it's kind of inverted, but it's the same kind of thing where you can only be a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer. Basically, you can't be, the Sam Altmans or the or the Elon Musks, but you can work for them, right? You can be their bitches and while they take all the credit, right? Or you can be in this healthcare industry where now these fucking insurance companies and these administrators are making all the money and you're just their bitch, right? Like that kind of thing where it wasn't really about the occupation, but it was just kind of like you're only going to be the maximum you can ever be is this cog in the machine. And as some of you may know about me, that didn't really sit well with me when I was in college myself. That kind of idea of like you can only be X, Y, and Z in society, right? That was kind of like what I railed against. I was like, I'm not gonna be a doctor. I'm not gonna do the cookie cutter Asian American shit. I'm gonna do what I want to do. I don't know. And then I just fucking played poker, I guess, and I was like, I'm gonna do finance. So I was a management consultant, and then I was laid off, and then I was like, you know what, I'm gonna be an actor or whatever. Just all the time, kind of just like carving my own path. So I kind of like resonated with Malcolm X because I was like, oh, he didn't accept like, because let's say he just accepted that, right? I mean, he would have just been like a regular dude working whatever. And I feel like he would never have come to all those conclusions that he had, especially since like he became very intelligent through his prison experience because he spent 14 hours a day just reading. That also impressed me too. Like, he was like one of the only black people in America to protest the Korean War in 1950 in a jail cell. And it's like, if somebody had the resources to read and learn about imperialism in 1950 from jail and understand how it all worked just from a fucking prison library, like what excuse does anyone have? There's all these excuses, especially from like you know, liberals or whatever, saying that it's classist or whatever to read or expect people to read or whatever. And it's like this guy 80 years ago or 75 years ago was reading in a fucking prison and figured out more shit than any white person did, you know, of his generation, you know. So it's just kind of like, I don't know. That book was just like very inspiring because it was just like it showed what someone of pure will could accomplish, you know. It was just kind of like, because the year before, you know, I was pretty depressed in general, but so I was reading kind of books about tech titans or media titans, you know, people I wanted to, I guess, emulate back in the day because, you know, I wanted to get big in the media industry or the tech industry, or, you know, that kind of interested me. And when I read like books about them or things that they wrote, nothing really impressed me that much. I feel like, especially knowing, you know, a billionaire tech CEO myself, I guess like I've never really had that sense of like, oh, these tech people are untouchable in terms of their intellect or whatever. I kind of had like had a healthy disrespect, I guess I would say, you know. But a healthy respect, but a healthy disrespect. I feel like because I am familiar, you know, not just with Zuck, but with the tech industry in general and with program, whatever, I'm kind of able to accurately assess whether tech people are actually full of it or if they're actually kind of intelligent. Um, but be that as it may, I was just like, yeah, there's no real question in my mind that Malcolm X, at least in terms of potential, I was like, this is the smartest American I've ever read in my life. And so, yeah, I don't know if that probably over answered your question, but that's what the book was that I would recommend if you're coming from zero, square one, and you're an American. I would recommend the autobiography of Malcolm X. And then once you're done with that, I would recommend Imperialism by Lenin as your second thing to read. I would even skip Communist Manifesto. I feel like it's okay to read just to like know what they were saying back in 1847 or whatever, but it's kind of somewhat outdated in my mind. So, if you're to start with Malcolm X and Lenin's Imperialism as your first two things. That would be my recommendation. And then going from there, the biggest thing that really turned me, obviously, in 2021 was just reading all about the Korean War and being like, yeah, this was a bunch of bullshit. This Nazi stuff in the back that's all there, that's all for this big research project that I don't even know if I'm going to be able to ever do. But I think I'm grateful that I researched this anyway, even if I end up not doing it, because it's given me so much more material now for understanding the Nazis and, you know, fascism in general and kind of like, you know, German philosophy also as well. I would say that my study of German stuff led me to, you know, the theory that I have about Breaking Bad. You know, I don't think I would have came to that theory if I didn't do all this fucking research, independent research on Germany. It just like the things just started coming together once I, you know, I had some inklings that it was like somewhat Marxist related because of Gale's bookcase. You know, I knew about that detail like years ago. Like 6 years ago, but I think like, you know, reading all this stuff helped put it all together. Now that I have all the references, you know. Let's see. Target focus training is how to fight against a gun or weapon when you are held up. It's how the Green Beret learned to survive the war. Oh, well, I mean, hopefully I'm not in that situation. But there are some people in New York that I think once I go to New York, I'll probably link up with. They do sort of more self-defense related sort of things. Um, I connected with Henry Z. He was the Dragon Combat Club in New York City. He organized that during the height of Asian hate. I still think it's kind of ongoing, so I might kind of like check in. He's actually the one, Hen Z is actually the one that connected me to the Wing Chun people that kind of connected me to my seafood today. So, um, yeah, I guess I'll look into that then. Checking Mr. Sar, sup, holy cow. Are we on par with the British? Par with what? Evil? Yeah, I mean, probably by now, yeah. I feel it's the invisibility encouraged by American norms that draw me to the likes of you and Malcolm X. Especially encouraging to think for yourself instead of feeding you goy slop. Yeah, I mean, I think I have always I've always been contrarian. For anyone who's known me even before 2019 or whatever, before anything, obviously my life is very contrarian in itself, as I just said before. Um, I don't like to. I don't like to be told what can't be done when I think it can be done. I feel like, or I don't like being told what my limits are. And that's just kind of like, you know, the thing, that when you do, that's like the untold thing about being an Asian American who pursues like a non-traditional thing like acting. Every step of the way, you're told it's not a thing, or you should not do this. And, it's not that they're not correct, right? Obviously, obviously, it's like telling a gambling addict, hey, don't gamble. Your chances of winning are very small against the house. You'll probably lose. And so, you know, joke's on me, I guess, right? I ignored all the haters and, didn't work out, obviously. But I think, like, I think that's all fine and good, but then, like, it's like the same sorts of people like to complain that there isn't some sort of Asian guy that's outspoken, that's, not docile and submissive or whatever. And it's like the people who, like, it's like both they only say it's not possible. Those kinds of people, they only say it's not possible because they want to justify never trying themselves. And so they can always say, oh, well, you know, it was never going to happen. So at least I avoided wasting time. It makes them feel better about themselves. And so that's why it's just kind of like annoying because, it's not really to like save me pain and anguish because nobody actually cares about anyone else's suffering, right? They only care about if this guy gets in and actually makes it and actually turns things around, that means my initial thesis was incorrect. And that means I could have done it if I had tried, but I didn't even try. But probably I wouldn't have gotten it because I'm actually not unique or special, you know? And so that's kind of why it annoys me. It's just like tinged with hypocrisy, you know? And so, I don't know. Read the book to me, JK. Oh, God. Oh, what was interesting was, so remember how I was like, hey, maybe I need to record my Substacks so that people will listen to it, right? And I was going to be doing that. But then I noticed, like, when I'm on the Substack app and I was on my own page, I was like, oh, there's a play option. It's like this weird AI voice. But it's like, that's serviceable enough. If you're that lazy and don't want to read, it's got a play option. It's got literally got a fucking play option. So no one has an excuse. I'm going to put it in. I'm going to put the link again. I'm going to plug my shit again because that's what I do. Nobody has an excuse, all right? Actually, it's interesting too. This is better performing, I think, than my Goyslop Matrix one. And I thought the Goyslop Matrix one was better written and like better researched and, you know, Goyslop. I'm like, oh shit. But I guess like people are so sick of Jeets online that they're like, I gotta know about what the fuck Jeetism is. I don't know what it is. People are like restacking it. I didn't even know that was a thing. Restacking is basically like a retweet on Substack. I guess that means they share it with their Substack subscribers. I'm not even like, you know, I haven't used Substack too much. I started my Substack in 2020. So I guess Substack has been around for a while. I'm not exactly sure how it all kind of works. But yeah, you guys don't have an excuse because it is now they do this AI thing where let me see if I can find it and then show you guys. All right. So, I don't know how I think it's easier on the app. There's like a play thing. But let me show you guys. All right. So you see how there's a listen thing right here on the right side? When you click listen, something happens. All right, well, that didn't work. I think this is maybe only works on the app, but I definitely used it on the app. So oh yeah, and this is the likes, the amount of likes. Yes, I like my own thing to increase the amount of likes. This is obviously an amount of comments, and this is the restacks that I talked about. So people are restacking it a lot more than they did the first article. The next article might take a while since I have to do like 2 or 3 videos before I do that one. But listen, I'm pretty sure this option works on I know it's not working right now, but pretty sure this option works on your phone if you have the Substack app. There's an app for it as well, so you can get Substack app. So it is 37 minutes. I did see on the bottom it was 37 minutes long. But, you know, when you're at the gym, you know, running along, you can listen to the cheat stuff, you know. Cheats are angry reading my Substack too. It's interesting because like You know what's funny actually? Somebody wrote, so I'll show this. Although I don't agree with all this, it's very nice, incisive deep dive into deeper mechanics of race relations. And then he wrote something like, he restacked it. I don't agree with all the viewpoints and conclusion of this comprehensive essay. It is third worldist in its outlook. So clearly this guy's right winger, but it's kind of funny that he was like, "Oh, there's some good points here." Um, as an English ethno-nationalist, but yeah, you know, it's interesting how different sorts of people are finding it, whatever. But yeah, just listen to it now, all right? Holy cow! Basically, you have no excuse anymore. It's just fucking. I mean, yes, it is still AI, and the inflections are a little weird, but you know, it beats me having to fucking record that whole thing, right? Because like, while it is only 37 minutes or whatever, that would translate into probably around 3 or 4 hours of actual recording time for me. Which I'm happy to do if it actually, you know, does increase readership or whatever, but I feel like it doesn't really. Um, all right, thanks, holy cow. As you know, I'm still working on the WMAF thing, but as a reward, this will be a video. So you know, no reading required for this one. That's what's gonna happen. Anyway, on to the topic. On to the topic of what's going on. So 1.5 trillion dollars. What does that mean? That's the question that Mr. David Tay asked earlier. Does anyone know what I'm referring to? 1.5 trillion dollars. What could it be? What could I be referring to? You know, there's a lot of things that are 1.5 trillion or in that vicinity that I guess I could be referring to, right? Apparently, Elon Musk is on track to becoming, you know, what's his net worth right now? I don't know, it's something ridiculous. His net worth right now is $852 billion. How is that even possible? Like, I'm sorry, but Tesla is not doing that much. Wait. All right, so it says the wealth of Elon Musk has its own Wikipedia page. So apparently, he owns around 12% of Tesla common stock, holds options to acquire another 8%. And what's Tesla worth today? Tesla is at a 1.13 trillion market cap. So that would be only like 140 billion or so. Maybe 200 something billion. Where's the rest of the 600? Oh, his most valuable asset is actually SpaceX. He owns 42 to 43% of the space company, which is worth $300 billion. Wait, so his space company is worth like fucking $700 billion? Like, where does it even make money? Like, does this space shit even make money? Like, who's buying stuff from SpaceX right now? I guess our fake moon mission from NASA. I guess also XAIX is part of his net worth. His net worth grew rapidly after SpaceX began to reach massive valuations. Yeah. Defense contract seems like, you know, why he's a fascist, right? I mean, that's the most obvious, like, military industrial complex shilling of all time, right? Ever since 2022, ever since he took over X, like, it's just been to promote his, connection with the military industrial complex. All Silicon Valley pros switched to milking taxpayer through defense contract, pretty much. I mean, that's what tech companies are, really. Like, I hate talking about this since, like, this was like a conspiracy theory that Professor Zhang threw out, but it does feel like, the internet was created by the DARPA project. It was a defense project that was to connect universities and research institutions, scientific research institutions, in the event of nuclear war, right? That these institutions would be able to communicate with each other and, I guess, share research or whatever the case may be in their little nuclear bunkers, Ivy League nuclear bunkers, and I guess create weapons of mass destruction to destroy the Soviet Union or whatever it is. But once the Cold War ended, right, now it's being used for commercial applications. And it's not, the CIA and the NSA, they knew that this had the potential to be all kind of like surveillance all over the world. They knew the potential of the internet in the 1990s, way before even dot-com era started, like, all that hype. And yeah, ever since, it's just kind of been like, what do these tech 2.0 people, like, how have they really added value to people's lives? Like, when you think about the material conditions of, like, the 1990s, and then you think about them today, you're like, well, did all that technology actually improve our lives? Or did they just make it more efficient to corral us and control us for, extractive purposes, right? Like, everything is much more expensive. Everything, like, necessities are much more expensive. And, just like, no matter how pristine those pixels are on your television, or, how fast your smartphone is that really, like, obviously, I think, most people would agree the answer is no. I feel like if you were to ask, like, a Gen Z person, hey, would you rather be a 25-year-old today, or would you rather be a 25-year-old in the 1990s? They would, hands down, pick the 1990s. Like, I feel like if you asked any Gen Z person that's not, like, a gajillionaire, or I guess, like, Sophie Rain or whatever, making millions off OnlyFans. If you're not, like, someone who's making a trillion bajillion dollars out of some nonsense internet thing or crypto thing, I feel like the answer will always be, yeah, I wish I was born in the 1990s. Or I wish I was 25 in the 1990s, rather. And so all these sorts of, like, tech companies, Yeah, they're just basically extracting value from infrastructure that was already created by defense companies. That's why they're all it's all seems like they're like competing interests, like, the tech company is disrupting, all these industries, blah blah blah, whatever. And this is better competition, whatever, whatnot. But really all it was consolidation of America's businesses into the military industrial complex. Because that's what technology basically, or the tech industry is. It's, and kind of Elon's SpaceX or whatever, that's kind of like a very tangible return to the obviousness of that. Whereas, like, you kind of had inklings a bit here and there when, Facebook kind of got into trouble with Cambridge Analytica and all this other stuff 10 years ago. The cracks started to show, but now that nobody even, like, gives a shit about appearances, they're just kind of like, yeah, I'm just, providing Starlink and whatever for the military, you know. Isn't Chang a Duganist? Well, Dugan is also retarded. I'm sorry, but if you listen to Dugan and you think he's like some sort of visionary, you're just, I mean, it's just like the retards leading the retards, But yeah, they're Dugan's. I don't know if he's an acid or not, but he's just retarded to me. But Zhang more seems like an asset to me. I would say he's like 80-90% an asset in some regard. Dugan is just like an idiot. All Silicon Valley pros, yeah, Zhang did his homework. 1990s can afford shit. Wait, you can afford shit or you can't afford shit in the 1990s? I don't know. Anyway, the $1.5 billion I'm talking about, though, is apparently Trump is going to announce $1.5 billion of a military budget for 2027, I guess. Or I don't know, the fiscal year start. I don't even fucking know. But the point is, we're going to be spending 1.5. After all this, like, oh yeah, Doge and inefficiency, it's like that all is like just obvious fucking nonsense. And it's such fucking obvious bullshit that it's like, it's the kind of thing that it's just kind of like, this is why the smart capitalists stay under the radar. I've been reading about the Rothschilds and their origins. I think Andrew was recommending this book to me, or someone in this chat. I've been reading through it. I'm like halfway through or so. And I got to the part where it talks about the Rothschilds. How it started with this guy in the 1700s, the mid 1700s, and how they like to stay out of the spotlight, right? Because if you're staying out of the spotlight, nobody can see what you're doing. Nobody knows that you're wheeling and dealing all these sorts of deals in Europe, all these wars and shit. But Elon's not so very smart, right? Because, like, the contradictions of capitalism now become very, very obvious. Because he's all talking like, yeah, the Democrats were so wasteful, blah, 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 whatever. And then now he's worth, all this fucking money because of SpaceX, which is very obviously a military industrial complex related sort of contract thing. Because, like, with other sorts of billionaires, you know, at least like with Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg or, you know, all these other tech people, you can kind of trace Sergey Brin or whatever. You can kind of trace where their money comes from, right? You know, everyone uses Google, everyone uses YouTube, everyone uses Instagram. You know, advertising money flows upwards. Okay, I understand that business model. Or Amazon, you have to sell shit, or AWS gives you cloud services, or, you know, I can understand that model. But with SpaceX, you're just kind of like, why are we going to space right now? Why are we spending money on space right now? Because Elon says that, you know, we need to be interplanetary, and even though the heat death of the sun isn't happening for another 500 million years, we just have to be interplanetary now, I guess, because Elon, you know, says we need to be. And then now he's being given $300 billion of net worth. Like, his company is that doesn't provide value for anyone right now is worth like $700 billion. Like, that's so very obvious that, like, where his incentive structures lie. And then, like, when he says shit like, oh, I'm making the fucking government more efficient with Doge and all this shit, and then, like, it becomes very obvious that the Republican Party is, you know, because under Biden, our military budget was like, still, it's pretty high still, but it was like 800 billion or whatever. And the whole thing about the Trump presidency was like, no new wars, blah blah blah, whatever. And then now it's like $1.5 trillion. He's proposing, because, like, this war in Iran apparently cost $100 billion just to fucking, you know, like, bomb them and shit and whatever, and fail bombing them because, you know, our forces are not as good as advertised. That's the other thing with the military industrial complex. You know, once it becomes a monopoly, they also don't actually perform. They actually are not doing, you know, the job well. They're just getting paid to do the job because no one else is, you know, no one else can compete at that level. You're not going to start a Boeing or a Northrop Grumman, you know, out of scratch and compete with these companies, right? You're not going to, like, hey, let me build a competitor to the F-35, right? That's not happening. No startup is like, hey, let me make a new F-35, right? And not only that, like, manned vehicles or manned aircraft, that they're becoming obsolete, right? Even Elon himself was kind of saying that. And so, you know, we're just like dumping trillions of dollars into a war we cannot win, a war we don't even have objectives of winning, and is just, you know, is just worsening our position in the world. Like, really, like that meme of China sitting back and enjoying the fall of the United States. You know, that meme from 2014 in The Onion. That was like 12 years ago. And it's just like, China's like, all right, I guess we're going to have the petro yuan now. You know, like, because Iran's only letting ships that pay in yuan get out of the Strait of Hormuz. So all that shit for what? It's like we don't even have like $1.5 trillion. That means like what? This if, you know, somebody commented like, oh, this means that they think it's going to last for 15 months. Well, the military budget was already like 800-900 billion before. So maybe they think that this thing is going to last for 6 months, right? Because that would be $600 billion on top of the 900 that we're spending. And it's just kind of like, holy shit. Like, what are we even doing? Like, do numbers matter anymore? Like, this is why I say that, I don't know. You know, this is why I waver between black pillism and, doing something, trying to, educate and whatever, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, if I'm thinking a bit about it from like a fascist point of view, right? Like a tech bro fascist point of view. Like if you're the CIA from the 1990s, if you're InQtel from the 1990s, you're like, okay, we knew a few things to be true. We know that um at one point people are going to find out the truth. The internet is going to reveal a lot of things to a lot of people. There's just going to be a lot of dots for people like, people like me, for example, to connect and figure out what's going on. And so that's an eventuality. So what we can do is back as many companies as we can that are in this new industry so that we have control over it. And that's what they did with the, Peter Thiel being early in Facebook. They kind of like brought up Oracle, which was based off of, CIA databases or whatever with Ellison. Sergey Brin from Google. He was ex-Soviet Jew, right? So there's that sort of like Zionist sort of influence as well. And Facebook, Peter Thiel. What else? Yeah. So they kind of like made sure that even though there's going to be people who connect the dots, we're going to try to minimize as much as possible by controlling whatever. So that's what they're doing on top from the information flow. But they know that eventually shit's going to fall apart, right? Let's just say the CIA has been planning this from past 30 years, right? What's their contingency? Well, I think like ever since, they created the Department of Education, right? That was in 79. A big part of that, in my opinion, was to control the history textbooks, especially after Vietnam, right? Because they had to rewrite what happened there. They had to rewrite the narrative. They had to be like, well, we tried to give them democracy, but we failed, right? Or, it was kind of like the Department of Education was almost like a reactionary thing of like creating propaganda for American children about Vietnam and about it's Western imperialism in general. But one of the other things I think, this tinfoil hat on, right? This, you're going to call me a tinfoil hat. But I truly think that the Department of Education, maybe not at 1970, its initial directive probably was for the Vietnam, the same way the Japanese write their textbooks to kind of be like, yeah, Nanching, I don't know if that was real or not, like they say that shit in Japan, right? Same way America does that with its textbooks about Vietnam, whatever. I think somewhere along the lines they were like, we need to also maybe not make people good at math. This is my tinfoil hat because, like, the reason I say this is because I remember, like, me myself growing up, right? And so I grew up, obviously, I was born in 1983. And, my dad gave me, like, just, I never even went to Kumon or whatever. I just, like, had Kumon books. Like, my dad would just give me Kumon books without any instruction. Just like, here's some books, just do that. I'd probably ask questions about what symbols meant and whatever, but I'd pick it up pretty quickly. And, just from fucking doing it on my own as like a game, like I thought it was like a game or something at like 4 years old or 5 years old, I was doing math years beyond what American school children were doing. And for the longest time, I thought it like, oh, wow, I must be pretty smart, I guess, if, because I was in a class, for example, in middle school where in 8th grade, it was considered 11th grade math, course 3, right? In New York, there's course 1, course 2, course 3. I was in course 3, which was junior year high school math in 8th grade. But really, it was like, that math was like trigonometry. It wasn't that. I mean, I guess that was 11th grade for some people, but I would like, and then I was doing calculus, obviously, in 10th grade. And I was like, because like before calculus, everyone's like, oh man, calculus, it's so like hard or whatever. They talked about calculus as if it was some sort of like beast that was unconquerable or whatever. And then when I took it, I was like, this shit's fucking easy. What are you talking about? And I really think it's just because like the American math program, and mind you, I am in one of the top public schools in the nation, right? Like my school was listed at like top 50 in the nation, in terms of like, I guess, because like my class was around 130. The top 20, 25, top 30 people, maybe even like top 50 people went to like top 25 schools. The top 20 people definitely went to mostly Ivy League or comparable. And so, yeah, it's just kind of like, wait a second. Obviously a lot of those top 20 were in the same classes that I was. But it was just kind of like, if that's the standard, I thought it was smart because like I was well above the standard, but the standard is so bad that I realized like if I was in Korea, like growing up with the same sort of abilities, maybe I'd be better, right? Because I'm Korean and there's more intense competition, whatever. And so like I'd have to work harder, whatever. But if I had the same skill level, like let's say I moved to Korea when I was like 8 or 10 or whatever, I would still probably be top 10% maybe in math or whatever, but I wouldn't be like the top spot, I'd be like, it's kind of like in America, I'm like an NBA all-star level at math, but in Korea, I would probably be like, maybe a starter at best. I don't know if I'm doing the analogy correctly. Probably a 6th man of the year type player, but definitely not like an all-star in Korea. Like the all-star in Korea, those are like fucking like Lee Sedol, or even like the fucking like fakers of the world. These people of like supreme ability, And yeah, that would be me. I would just be a 6th man of the year in terms of math. And so a lot of the reason why I talk about this is because like when I think about the history of the world, like dialectical materially or whatever, and how the ruling class sort of keeps their power, right? So back in the day when it was way before, like it was just tribe against tribe, And back then, I guess it was like if you were the strongest man of your tribe, if you were the greatest warrior, you would probably lead the pack, right? And then over time, as tribes conquered other tribes, the conquering tribe, well, their leader would be the leader of the entire thing, and then that's how civilization sort of developed. And then eventually, once they got super big, in order to maintain a lot of that control, you had to basically say, oh, well, our ruler is kind of like a god. So if you defy that, you're defying God. So they kind of like built a whole like, Pharaoh, the king, the god of the sun, the sun king sort of mythology around that. And then, during the Middle Ages, it was about like that was feudalism. Now we're from slavery to feudalism, but then there were all these like, oh well, the church is the kind of like the arbiter of what is good and evil, the moral center. So they kind of have the power, and in order to kind of like keep their power and stay consistent with their own Christian law or ethics, they kind of had to like be like, well, that's just what the Bible, whenever somebody had a problem, they'd be like, well, the Bible said so, so just have to do it. Even if the Bible didn't say so, because the way they got away with that is they had a lot of illiteracy. Only less than 10% of men even knew how to read. Less than 1% of women knew how to read. So they controlled the people by saying that's what the Bible said. You can't read Latin. You don't know what the Bible said. Yeah, and out of those 10%, like less, I'm sure like not that many people knew how to speak Latin. So whenever there was like an issue, they would just be like, and so they relied on illiteracy to control people, right? With feudalism, with capitalism, right? A lot of the during the time of slavery in America, it would actually be illegal, right, to teach people how to read, because they didn't want slaves to actually read about liberty, ideas about liberty and democracy, because you'd be like, wait, what about, right? That's kind of like what happened with World War One, right? When Woodrow Wilson was talking about self-determination and sovereignty and all these ideas, Ho Chi Minh was like, yeah, that sounds cool. What about us? Koreans were like, yeah, sounds cool. What about us? Chinese people were like, yeah, that sounds good. That's what the May 4th movement was. That's what the Saigon movement was. That's what, Ho Chi Minh going to Treaty of Versailles was. That's because they read that shit. They were like, oh, this sounds good stuff to me. This freedom, equality sounds pretty good to me. That's the stuff that they didn't want black people to read, right? So in the same way, I feel like now capitalism obscures the relation between labor and capital, right? That's the whole sort of way it operates. It hides those contradictions under a lot of this financial mumbo jumbo machination stuff. There's stuff in here. I mean, like I feel like I knew a lot about this stuff already. Obviously I work in finance myself, and stuff here isn't like surprising, but it is helpful to kind of like understand the mechanisms and the exact kind of way it operates. And I feel like the only reason I'm able to do that is because, in America, like I said, I am like an all-star level mathematician, at least for Americans, right? And I did used to work in finance myself, right? I'm a literal class trader, not just because I'm, wealthy, but because I know exactly how everything operates, and I think it's a fucking piece of shit system. And I thought this even before I was even I was a libertarian, and I was thinking this, or it's like a very apolitical. I didn't care about politics at all. I just knew, when I was laid off in 2008, that this system was fucking bullshit. That's kind of why I left that industry to join another bullshit industry. But, you guys all know that story. But anyway, it's just kind of like $1.5 trillion. I was a lib. I was a libtard. I wasn't actually a lib. Well, libertarian tard, I guess. I never actually voted for a Democratic candidate for president my entire life. I voted for Trump in 2024. I don't regret it. People are like, oh, I bet you regret it now. No, don't regret it, because I already know the reasons why I voted. It was a troll vote. It was a vote in California. It was a vote that didn't matter. Just like the reason I didn't vote for the first 36 years of my life. Didn't fucking matter, right? As a 12-year-old who was good at math, I understood the Electoral College and I understood all that shit. So, but anyway, it's just, I don't see how, like, for someone like me who's like mathematically inclined, even without communism or whatever, if I were to see, like, let's say you took 34-year-old me, or 36-year-old me, I guess. That was 6 years ago. Let's say you took 36-year-old me before the pandemic, you transported him to 2026. I don't know anything about communism, but I still know what I know about math and numbers and the finance stuff. I look at fucking, $37 trillion in debt and 1 point whatever percent, kind of like, 1 point something trillion dollars in just tax obligations per year on top of, the budget that we have, plus another $500 billion. I'm just like, this, like, I don't care what you are, Republican, liberal, whatever. Like, you cannot tell me that this is a sustainable thing. Like, this is going to collapse. Like, $1.5 trillion military budget. When does it end? When does the fucking money printer end? And I guess maybe this is something out of self-interest too, right? Maybe this isn't the class. I'm not an actual class trader in this regard, because, yeah, my money will be devalued, obviously. I don't know what that's gonna, as someone who's, not really going to be working in the industrial complex of this capitalist industrial complex. It's a very real concern for me, right? It's just like, what are we even doing? Like, there's no good outcome here. Like, it's just, I feel like America is like the Titanic, right? And I feel like we're hitting iceberg after iceberg, and there's still like 20 icebergs in front of us. And our solution is to go into more icebergs. And then most people, like, their lack of math education makes these icebergs invisible to them. And so they're just like content being the playing the orchestra. They're like fucking like, yeah, like, yeah, And I always kind of joke about that, how like, well, before I joked about how, to my friend, how Hollywood is like the Titanic, and how like Asian Americans, because of Crazy Rich Asians and I guess like recent more Asian visibility and Shang-Chi and all these other fucking things in the past decade or so, increased Asian visibility. They're like happy to be on the thing. They're like, yeah, we've made, they're like fucking Leonardo DiCaprio. Their third class tickets on the Titanic, being like, yeah, we made it a Titanic, and the Titanic's fucking about to fucking hit the iceberg. And that's Hollywood, right? And I feel like it's the same thing where America is this Titanic. And I feel like there's just a lot of people who, within tech or within like some other sort of like quick money making industry, like crypto or whatever have you, that don't see, I mean, they of all people should be, mathematically inclined. They should be, but I think their mentality is like, I know we're going to hit an iceberg, but let me grab as much shit off the boat as I can before we do, And so there are those people, the rich people, who are just grabbing everything that they can, like that fucking rich dude in the Titanic being like, fuck these women and children, I'm getting my seat on the fucking lifeboat, right? But I feel like most Americans are kind of retarded mathematically. They don't see this 1.5, like they don't see these numbers. Like the average American is going to be like, oh, 1.5 trillion. Oh, I guess, it's not that much more than 800, 900 billion, I guess. What's another 600 billion of money that, cuz like this money is really just like, it seems like it's printed out of nothing. But every time, the American government is paying for stuff that it doesn't have the money for, it goes into debt, right? It goes into U.S. treasuries. And American taxpayer money is literally used to service that debt. So we are on the hook. Like, it doesn't seem like that to the average American. Like, oh yeah, they're just going to print money. Like, that was the whole thing, about, remember like 5-6 years ago during the pandemic when we were getting all those bonus checks and everyone was like, yeah, bonus checks, blah, 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 whatever. And there was all this fucking like debate about this $400 billion, $500 billion bonus checks to Americans during COVID, and about how this was going to ruin the economy, et cetera, blah, 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 whatever. But then nobody talked about the $4.5 to $5 trillion being just thrown into PPP funds for like fucking worthless businesses that deserve to fucking go out of business. Right? Like, what do you think's actually gonna increase inflation? The $500 billion given to like random people that does nothing, even, or the $5 trillion given to useless fucking corporations that close down their business right after they receive that cash? Like, 70% of the money in circulation today came from 2020, 2021. Like, I don't know. I just am so surprised that people, not just like the average American, but like the average like PMC American It's just like I talk to, I still have a lot of PMC friends, right? And so sometimes I, ask like not about what they think politically, but what they think about the world and how it's going to go. And a lot of them are like, yeah, whatever, it's whatever. Doesn't affect me, so. And I'm just kind of like, yeah, it doesn't affect you now. But are you seeing the math? Are you like, how do you think it's sustainable that like real estate prices can go up this high? Do you think it's sustainable that college education can go this high? Do you think it's sustainable that like, all these sort of inelastic goods can just keep going exponentially and life will just go on as it has been for the past, like since the 1990s, infrastructure has deteriorated significantly. Like, what in your mind, and not only that, everything inelastic has been going up in price significantly as well, supply demand, obviously. And so it's like, in what world, like exactly Kaiser 9000, you don't even need to know math that America's going to collapse, right? You can just fucking see it, like the eye test, right? If you're just like fucking cognizant of the world, just like go to middle America, just travel around, look around and see what's going on. It's like this is not like the next 30 years is not going to look like the past 30 years. You know what I mean? Like, that would be a win. Like, even though the past 30 years has been kind of like a downhill whatever, if we were to kind of like plateau at this level right now, that would be kind of like still sucky, but like, you can kind of like figure something out or work something out, or but it's gonna get worse. It's even gonna get worse at this. It's not even gonna turn around. Like, people think, like, I guess people are delusional. The average American, like the average PMC, is still delusional enough to think that like this is just a phase. It's gonna turn around. We're gonna have a fine. We're gonna, I feel like people don't really understand the concept of like black swan events, or really that like there's this concept, in investing, right? Of, or even just in probability theory, of like independent events, like past historical events do not necessarily predict future events, right? They can point in kind of like the right direction, right? And that's how investors typically make money, by making correct assessments of like capital investments, right? But eventually something there happens in, like, especially in capitalist societies, there's eventually some sort of event where, it's kind of like a rubber band. The falling rate of profit, the falling rate of profit is like this rubber band. Whereas we get closer to zero profit, now businesses close down. Now people don't want to borrow as much money. Now there's, less liquidity. Now people are trying to sell. Now there's a crisis in the market and everything goes to shit. And I just like, I guess like this past month of just this worthless, retarded war in Iran, and I'm just kind of like, man, when are people gonna get it? Or maybe they have. I don't know. When are enough people gonna get it? I guess, right? Because yeah, obviously, if you're here, then you know, right? If you're here, you know. If you're you know, like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of people do know though too, and are just kind of like so black pilled. They're like, you know what? Just gonna party until the shoe does drop, and then I'll deal with it then. You know, there's a lot of sentiment about that, like that. I'm sure. Like, you know, for the past few years, there's been something called like doom spending, where people are in such high credit card debt where they don't even care if they go bankrupt. It's like, whatever. What's another $1,000 on my $50,000 credit card tab gonna do to me, right? Um, and you know, can't say that's not a valid response to what's going on in the world. Um, I mean, can't say that's not. Can't say that's yeah. Can't say it's not valid, right? Obviously, I understand the sentiment, but I don't know. I guess it's just kind of like, what is the realistic option for people who aren't that black pilled, for people who want to, you know, be part of a functioning society. You know, is there another tangible solution other than being like, you know what? It's time to move to China. You know, it's time to move to a communist country. Um, is there another solution? Or alternatively, like, what is to be done, right? The very common Lenin phrase, what is to be done? 1.5 trillion, guys. 1.5 trillion. And it's just kind of like, dude, I almost feel like there's been a point where there's been a point recently where what the American masses actually think and what the government actually does are so now like opposed to each other that the government has stopped caring to even put on a pretense of caring what the American public thinks. Um, and I don't know. I thought that would be a good thing because I thought that would wake up a lot of people. But it seems like what's actually happening is that, you know, taken from that tinfoil hat thing on again, right? Let's say the CIA and the fascist people that powers that be have already kind of like considered all these angles. You know, they've been planning this stuff since the 1990s, right? Let's say, like In-Q-Tel and all this other stuff in the 1990s. If they've been planning for this eventuality, they know that, you know, eventually everything's going to collapse. But the CIA, all these rich people, what they do is that they, you know, they've been building bunkers, right? Obviously. So when you look at it like that, you're like, oh, they know that civil war and chaos might be an eventual sort of thing that happens. But they're currently positioning themselves such that after that all plays out, they'll still be around. They'll still have a lot of power. They'll still have a lot of resources. And it'll just be a lot of people that, you know, that kill themselves off, and the rest of them are going to be easy to control afterwards. That's kind of like what I think. If I were like some evil, like CIA agent overseeing everything, being like, okay, well, you got to make sure, the Rothschildren and the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts or whatever, the Guggenheims, whatever, the families that run shit these days. We got to make sure that they retain their money. That's been their prerogative since God knows when, right? That's been why they've been around. They've been there to protect the interests of these very large banking families. And so they have no actual loyalty to a country. They are... People say that, communists are globalists or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then, this is part of the globalist cabal, whatever. That's kind of like the Nazi line, the Nazi propaganda line. They're not wrong. But I would say, just like capitalism, like the idea of capitalism or the form of capitalism that first came about through mercantilism in the 1300s, all that stuff, that actually did end, right, in the 1900s, the early 1900s, when the Federal Reserve was created. This is how they socialize production, by basically being like, hey, now that finance capital has control over industrial capital, they can just move their capital to industries with higher rates of profits to maximize their return on investment. And so this is how they socialize production, being like, hey, well, this industry is more profitable because it clearly has the society needs this product, and they're paying more for this product profit wise. So we're going to put more capital in there. That's how socialized the economy became. It provided, like, moving finance in that way did provide a social function for the economy. But this was socialism for the bourgeoisie. This was dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, right? So capitalism became a dictatorship, or socialist dictatorship, in the 1900s. It's just there were two modes of socialist production. There was the bourgeois socialist production, and then there was the proletariat, the USSR version, right? And yeah, I think in the same way. Wait, where was I going with this? I think it was like, I was going to make the analogy of this, of like how in the same way, the globalized thing, sorry, fucking retarded. So in the globalized thing, it's the same thing where it's true that capitalists have globalized the economy, right? That's what the socialization has done. They socialize the economy so that it's this global network and everything. But it's socialism, again, for the rich and the powerful. And ironically, these Nazis, these, anti-capitalist Nazis, they're against globalization, right? Because they think it's because it's this Jewish cabal that's trying to take over the world with this globalization and all this other stuff. And they're half right, right? Just like Hitler was half right. their kind of hat fry was as well. It is this globalized network that is trying to control the entire world under finance capital. But it isn't the Jews, and it isn't through fucking communism. It's through the actual banking cartel. And yes, there are Jewish people in that banking cartel, but it's not this exclusively Jewish thing. And it's not this exclusive Jewish thing that only started kicking in, after 1967. It's like these fucking neo-Nazis or whatever, they want you to believe that, yeah, if there were no Jews, we wouldn't be in this situation. It's like, no, you were part of the reason, or you were the main reason, actually, that we're in this situation to begin with. Western imperialism is pretty much all your fucking fault. So, it's just all this kind of like, you know what it is? Maybe that's it. It's just this refusal of Westerners or whiteoids to like take accountability. Take accountability for like taking the L. Really just fucking be like, you know what? We got to take the L on this one. And that's what China did, right? China took the L. Mao and all those guys, they were like, what did we do wrong? What did we do wrong in the past? Why did we lose? Why did the Qing dynasty lose to the British? Why are we getting curb stomped by the Japanese, right? Like, what is going on here? What is the actual reasons why we are losing? Right? Like, how do we change that? How do we change it so we're never put into this position ever again? Like, where do we take the L? What do we do wrong? That's why, he kind of critiqued Confucianism. Even though Confucianism, Taoism has like good tenets in social organization, there were some aspects of it that Mao did critique, with regard to kind of like, so social development and all this other stuff, especially with respect to capitalist development. Even some Koreans that I talked to, they're kind of little Nazi coded, but some Koreans were like, you know what? We should have done what Japan did, right? We critiqued them at the time. Korea's critiqued the Meiji Restoration, said that they were losing their Asian character, said that they were betraying Asian kind of like culture by going into that, and kind of like degraded Japanese people for going into Western stuff. But then some of them were like, yeah, no, we fucked up there. We took the L. Japanese were able to do what they did because they adapted and we didn't. There are some Koreans who say that. And I would agree with some of that sentiment, right? I would agree that, it was part of due to ossified Yangban pride that probably prevented us from kind of like doing that. And some of our victories against other European powers, especially like the Americans who came in 1865, we probably got, a little big-headed after we drove people away, like the Europeans away. And we're like, they ain't shit. Europeans ain't shit. We got them. Whatever. Oh, yeah, these Japs trying to be Europeans, they ain't shit either, right? That's probably what went in their minds. And I agree. There was a little bit of L taking. But what do fucking whiteoids do? What did fucking Hitler and the Nazis do? They were like, after they lost to England and France, did they say, hey, maybe our ambitions got a little ahead of us. Maybe we shouldn't have been so quick to attack Russia because we knew for sure that England and France were going to join that side, and maybe we took a too big of a bite out of, our mouths were a little bit too big for our brains or whatever the phrase is. Um, you know, England being what it was, having control over all this fucking territory and resources, you know, were we ever going to win a war of attrition against England and France, given that they have all these colonies and we're kind of like confined to the resources that we have? Probably not. Right? Was it a good idea to send that Zimmerman telegram to Mexico and ensure America's entry into the war? Probably not. You know, there was never any L taking for the Germans, or the Nazis at least. There was never any like, hey, maybe that was a bad idea. There was always like, oh, you know why we lost? We lost because of the Jews. And, you know, if it weren't for the Jews, we would have won. That was basically the fucking Nazi line. You know, during World War One, even during the fucking World War, there was actually enough anti-Semitism that they actually believed that during the war. So they took a census. Germany took a census during World War One of their army, like who was on the front lines or whatever. And you know what they found? They found that German Jews were actually overrepresented because they had been through so much anti-Semitism in Germany. They were like, this is our chance. This is our chance to prove we're German. And, you know, this is a chance to prove our patriotism. So we're going out there. We're fighting for the Kaiser. We're fighting for the, you know, the German, you know, Hitler's fucking commanding officer, the one who gave him an Iron Cross, was half Jewish. It's like they blamed it on the people that were doing the most. It's like this is what whiteoid, like, this is why whiteoids can't do Marxism. They have no fucking L-taking ability. Because for the longest time, they made all this fucking race science, Darwin race science shit up to, like, kang themselves up. You know, we was Greeks, right? You know, they smashed France in 1870, and they're like, we're the Germans, we're the Aryans, we're the king of the whites. You know, we're like peak white. That's basically what they were saying. You know, they weren't just white supremacist. It's kind of like the Jews today, how there's Jewish supremacy. They were like saying like, no, we're actually better. We're not just better than black people or Hispanic people or the Native Americans or the Asians. We're actually better than even just other white people too. You fucking gypsies, you fucking Jews, you fucking Slavs, you fucking Czechs, even fucking French. You guys aren't even Anglo-Saxon. Like, maybe only the British are kind of like the whites that are on our level, but because they're kind of Germanic. But the Franks, the Frankens, the frankincense, I don't know. I'm not Euro enough to know the fucking term. What was it out of the Roman Empire? Was it the Franks that came out of France? I don't know, some bullshit. The Angles and the Saxons, they might be on our level, but the Celtics, the Irish people, the fucking French people, the fucking Slavs, Jews, Gypsies, we're the master whites. This was like the kanging that was going on in Germany. You know? That's all they fucking do. This is why communism can only come through white defeat. Right? East Germany, right? That was only due to their defeat, the Soviet Union. And then they fucked that up too. And then Khrushchev, you know, Brezhnev, all the Nevs, all the Evs, all the white Evs of the Soviet Union, they fucked it up. Gorbachev, I guess Yeltsin isn't a Ev, but he was just a president, right? All the Evs, all the white Evs, all the white kanging, it's because white people cannot take L's. They don't know how to take an L gracefully. For 500 years, they've just been taking W's. So when they meet at an actual L, they just don't know how to deal with it. Um, yeah. And that's why there were so many, like, even before imperialism, you know, there was just like a lot of wars between white people. They didn't know how to work together for the longest time. They wanted, they could not, they could not take an L against the other kind of like Euros. It's like, hey, you know, it was only like by the late 1800s, early 1900s, where they were like, some of them were like, hey, maybe we should stop fighting other white people and just take over the world together. That was Houston Stewart Chamberlain, the John the Baptist Hitler. That was Hitler's actual kind of like pitch to the West, especially to England. It's like, hey, join us in just taking over the world. We'll let you through. England, we're fine. You can hang on to India. We don't want the cheats. I think they literally were like, we don't want that shit. But once that didn't happen, of course, they did try to. It was interesting. I was reading a little bit about this, but India, some parts of their army rebelled against Britain during the World War II, and some of them linked up with Japanese forces. It was this Chandra Bose or something during World War II. It wasn't a significant enough faction to do anything, but they were seen kind of as like patriots in India after the war, even though they fought for the Axis powers ostensibly. And I get it, the same way I get like why some African people don't mind Hitler, because indirectly he was responsible for the end of direct British and French rule over Africa. So some Africans are like see Hitler somewhat positively. It's all kind of like once you get out of the idea that history is this black and white, good guy, bad guy, especially Westoid, whiteoid fucking framing of history as good versus evil, and usually the whiteoid thinks they're on the good side. When you get out of that paradigm and you're like, wait, things are a little bit more complex than they seem, you got to get into the dialectics of it. You got to get into the contradictions and figure out what actually is going on. Then you understand like how to think about things geopolitically. You don't think like, hey, who's bad guy, who's good guy in this situation. You're like, all right, who materially benefited from this event? How did this event come to be? Who caused this event? And you kind of just like look at the bottom line rather than this like Westoid framing of like good and evil nonsense that they're always gonna fucking frame as like they're good and the other guys are evil, right? So it's all already a bullshit fucking framing that you kind of have to like escape out of. Anyway, I feel like I've just been rambling. I don't even know what I'm fucking talking about. Let's see. Ever since 2020, my worldview has changed. Well, I mean, same here. I guess it's hard not to be black-pilled, huh? I think ultimately when JFK died in 1963, and they asked Malcolm X, "Hey, what do you think about that?" He said something to the effect of like, "That's what you get, right?" He was basically saying, "You fucked up. You fucked around in way too many places around the world. The world is gonna fuck you right back, right?" His actual phrase was, "When the chickens come home to roost, I'm not glad. I'm not mad, but I'm glad." Because that's basically he's saying justice has come, right? That's what happens. That's karma, right? That's what he's saying. And not to be defeatist, but in a way, I almost feel like we were living in a dream world for most of our lives, especially me, like, I guess talking from experience. Most of my life living in America, growing up in 1983, born in 1983, and growing up in that kind of environment. It's just kind of like our frame of reference was Pax Americana, right? We never knew a time when we were attacked or blah, blah, blah. We never really knew what struggle was. If we're being really honest with ourselves, like if you take the entirety of the human experience on planet Earth from 200,000 years ago, most of us, if you're listening to this right now, especially, you're probably at least somewhat off enough. We had a pretty good existence compared to 99.9999% of humanity. Human experience of the past 200,000 years, right? But I think just like 1963, and just like now, we're kind of like seeing the piper, the price, the 1.5 trillion dollar bill, the $37 trillion bill is coming to be paid, right? Or the payment is due. And I think ultimately it might seem like the end of the world, whatever, but it's just kind of like the reality of our comfortable existence being like, this is what that comfortable existence cost. This is the cost of it. Or this is, it was paid for by bombing and destroying all these other places for, a century or so. And now the $1.5 trillion bill, now the trillions of dollar bill, now it's all coming to fucking pass. And once we lose our dominance, people think like, oh yeah, America, we have so many allies or whatever. Like those people, a lot of these people were only our allies because they didn't have any other choice. If they weren't our allies, the CIA would kill their leaders until they found somebody that was their allies. I feel like most people don't realize that this paradigm shift from Iran, the Iran war, it's going to be much more than just about this Strait of Hormuz, the oil, the petrodollar. It's going to be so much, like, it's going to signal to a lot of places like, oh, United States doesn't really have as much power as I thought it had. Maybe if they're distracted over there, maybe we can do some stuff that they didn't let us do now. And what are they going to do about it? They're already spending $1.5 trillion on this fucking war. What, they're going to start another war here? Maybe not, Places are going to be testing. Places are going to be prodding. Places like former allies are going to be like, you know what? And it's already kind of happening, right? We were already seeing a lot of places, especially in ASEAN. There was this recent poll that came out that showed that China overtook Japan. Japan was top spot for the longest time of most trusted country in Southeast Asia. But recently, China overtook Japan. And it's like, everyone's like, oh, wait, why did it happen? Like Westoids or Whiteoids are like, what's going on? It's like, do you not understand how, fucking electing cart titan Hitler looks to the rest of Southeast Asia? Yeah, the Filipino fucking liberals are the most annoying fucking pieces of shit ever, right? Because they talk about how East Asians are so racist and, decolonization, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm just kind of like, bitch, your country is still named after King Philip, all right? Decolonize that first before talking to any of us. Don't fucking talk to me about decolonization when your fucking country is still named after a white dude for 400, 500 years ago. King Philip of Spain. Get the fuck out of my face. Like talking to me about decolonization. Get the fuck out of here. All these fucking Filipino Maoists, like fucking Sison Glazers. You guys are fucking retarded. It's like, oh, China's aggression against our boats. Fucking retards. What the fuck did America ever do for you besides like murdering you straight up? Arthur MacArthur just murdered millions of you straight up, and then fucking Douglas MacArthur left you guys to burn the fucking beaches of Bataan. You dumb fucks. And then the Japs were the ones that fucking killed you at Bataan. And now you're fucking weeb amboys. Get the fuck out of my face. Siebling bitches. God. Sea Jeets, Sieblings, like Indonesian Jeets. It's all fucking retards. Anyway. I have been rambling on for a long time. Anyone have any kind of questions? I'm going to probably end. No, that's his actual name, Tommy Turtle. Arthur MacArthur is Douglas MacArthur's father's name. He was commander of the forces in the Philippine-American War. Thanks, Asian movement. I think they think China splashing water on their boats is worse than America. Pinoys are just like, I am now, I guess, like, it's interesting. Recently on Twitter, I've been kind of seeing these like teenager / Gen Z Pinoys. A lot of them are like, yeah, I fucking hate other Filipino. There's fucking leftist retards. And I'm like, yeah, feel sorry for you guys. But there are, obviously, like Lysenko dialectical racism is never like a racism of like your inner determines your outer. Like, it's not actual physiognomy. It's not actual phrenology, right? That's fucking Westoid, Whiteoid racism. That's like analytic racism, right? Where you're saying because of your outer exterior, these are your inner characteristics, right? That's whiteoid racism. But Lysenko, Doug Kim, dialectical racism is more like, what is your environment like? What is the environment shaping you like because of your ethnicity, right? So, for example, like if you're black people, you have a higher propensity to go into the military. You have a higher propensity to, try to be an athlete, right? Or go into entertainment, right? Because these are sort of like the funnels in which it's like, hey, if you're a black person, this is how you become rich, you become wealthy. You either become an entertainer, right? Like in music or entertainment, comedy, whatever. You either be an athlete, right? basketball, baseball, whatever it is, or you deal drugs. Those are your three choices, right? So Lysenko racism is more about acknowledging those funnels, acknowledging those realities. Not saying like, oh, because you're black, you can only be a basketball player or an entertainer. It's not that. It's more like, because you are black, the avenues available to you are this, this, and this, and therefore you are more likely to have attempted such avenues. And, and the same thing with fucking Asians, right? Like, if you're a Korean American, chances are you came to this country through the Hart-Celler Act in 1965. And because of that, because of the way the Hart-Celler Act is structured, your parents were probably at least somewhat skilled, technically, or they had enough money to start a business. That's what the H-1B is, right? It's like kind of like, it's not a racism based on your inner, or rather, it's not a racism based on just your physical characteristics. It's a racism based on your overall, the forces of society that act upon you, the negative dialectic of that. You know what I'm talking about? Any Hegelians out there who knows what I'm talking about? I don't even fucking know. You know what I'm talking about. Like, that's why I say, like, when I read Malcolm X, I'm just kind of like, I'm never really like, it's hard for me to be quote unquote racist against black people in regard to their intelligence, because I know that a fucking, like, the smartest American I've ever read is a black person. And the same thing with like Jews or whatever, like, just everyone's like, one of the main reasons is because I feel like white people just want to absolve themselves of responsibility for imperialism by just putting it on the Jews, right? In a way, they're kind of like, they're crucifying Jews for their own sin, the sins of Western imperialism. That's what neo-Nazis are doing, in my opinion. But other than that, it's just kind of like, Karl Marx was Jewish, so obviously I'm not inherently against Jews, because that would be stupid. It's like, well, Jesus was Jewish, right? Karl Marx was Jewish. It's not like they're inherently whatever. Like a Jewish friend of mine said something like, I might have said this last time, but he was like, the reason there's no Jewish conspiracy, or Jewish conspiracy is impossible, is because we hate each other too much to work together effectively without the help of like the Western power structures. Like, it just wouldn't happen without that. I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. Because I say all the time, right? The reason I know there's no Jewish conspiracy is because Zionist Jews literally worked with Nazis to kill as many Jews as possible. I mean, they might not have like outwardly said it like that. They might not have said it precisely like that, and there's enough plausible deniability to be like, well, we didn't know the Nazis were going to do all that, right? But the fact of the matter is, there's tangible evidence that the Zionists aided the Nazi regime. Whether they aided the Holocaust or not, which there's plenty of evidence suggests that they did, especially with the Katzner trial, the Hungarian Jewish guy who sacrificed 400,000 Hungarian Jews to save 1,600 of his friends, right? There's documented evidence that exists, right? So it's just kind of like, I'm just trying to be as fair and objective as I can. I always try to put myself in Like even when I was researching India, um, I was just like, yeah, what would I do if I was like a Indian Brahmin or Dalit or middle caste? What situation would I find myself in? That's kind of like how I wrote that last article, right? Like how would my reality look like? What would be my incentives? Okay. T-shirts, whatever happened to those? Oh, well, I mean, I guess I could still do it, but it seemed like there wasn't that much demand, so I just kind of like killed it. The other thing though is that I might come into some, you know, funding soon where I might just like buy a bunch and then have people buy it. You know, I have to kind of like wait on some stuff to see if I could just like do that. But no worries, real NYP. Yeah, I mean I'm probably gonna end soon, but streams are usually at 6:30. In case you didn't know, 6:30 on Thursdays and Sundays. But that's when it usually is. Um, but yeah, and I usually go for 2 hours, so I'm about to end. But yeah, the t-shirts, I haven't forgot about them, but uh, yeah, I might just wait till I get some more money, and then just buy a bunch, and then like sell them as people want them. I kind of still have to figure out some of the logistics of that, all that. Yeah, sorry I haven't been on top of that this past month. I'm gonna be honest. All the kind of work I did this past month was was kind of just like reading, like, and finishing that Jeedism article. I actually didn't think that was gonna do that great, considering that the first article I wrote didn't actually do that much, and I thought that was gonna be impactful. But this is actually doing better. So maybe it's just like I just need to be more consistent. And, because some people who read the Jeedism article, did also read the Goyslop article. So it's this kind of like snowballing effect, maybe just like having enough content where people are like, oh, this guy's a thing, and let me read his other content. Yeah, I mean, as you know, Real NYP, my streams go up online anyway, so you can just watch them. But yeah, all right. I'll talk to you guys next time. See you guys Sunday. Yeah. All right.